Hiroshima survivors never knew their paranormal tales would be silenced by America. This is the story we promised to uncover. On the morning of August 6, 1945, a light fell from the sky and turned a city to ash. Survivors woke inside a new, impossible world. Bodies burned, shadows froze in stone, and then, amid the rubble and the sirens, strange things began to happen. Voices that should not have been audible, lights that moved without a source. People who swore they felt hands on their shoulders when no one stood near. These accounts were whispered. They multiplied. They terrified. They also persisted. What changed those voices into silence? Not time, not forgetting. Something else moved in, an invisible pressure that narrowed the air around those testimonies. Files were shifted. Interviews were dismissed. Scientists stood silent in public. Survivors who had once spoken openly began to speak in half sentences, or not at all. One documented confession, recorded in 1947, vanished from public view. Why? Who decided those stories were a liability? And what did those stories say about what happened that morning that official records never captured? The shadows that whispered, the survivors of Hiroshima didn't call it haunting. They called it remembering. Yet what they remembered wasn't always what the official story allowed them to say. When the bomb fell, the blast erased nearly everything: the city, the sound, even the air. But memory, that strange and stubborn thing, refused to die. In the weeks that followed, those who crawled out of the ruins began to speak of things that defied explanation. Not just the horror of what they saw, but the things they felt afterward. Strange sensations. Ghostly echoes. Unexplainable sightings in a city of ash. One woman, her skin burned and half her face wrapped in cloth, told a relief worker she could hear her children's laughter echoing through the ruins at night, even though they had been killed instantly in the blast. Another man swore he saw hundreds of translucent figures walking toward the river, their outlines shimmering as if the air itself still burned around them. These were not isolated tales. They multiplied like the radiation itself, unseen but everywhere. By autumn of 1945, relief teams, mostly Japanese, some American, recorded fragments of these accounts. They called them psychological reactions, shock, trauma. But something in those testimonies unsettled even the medics. When one U.S. officer read through a stack of witness notes, he reportedly whispered, "They're not describing fear. They're describing contact." That phrase, contact, would appear in no public report. It was quietly removed. For months, rumors spread that the U.S. occupation forces had begun collecting personal testimonies from survivors, not to preserve them, but to suppress them. Nurses from Hiroshima's Red Cross Hospital later recalled how American officials came unannounced, requesting patient lists and confiscating handwritten diaries. Some survivors tried to protest. They were told the material was being archived for safety. None of it was ever returned, and still, the stories persisted. A Japanese teacher named Aiko claimed that each night she saw small orbs of light floating above the school courtyard, moving slowly, as if searching for something. It wasn't fire, she said. It was memory, glowing. She kept a notebook of what she saw for 3 months. Then it vanished from her home. When she asked the American translator she had befriended about it, he refused to meet her eyes. Something was happening in Hiroshima that no one wanted to put into words. And perhaps that's why, one winter evening in 1946, a small team of American scientists arrived with equipment no one had ever seen before: radiation counters, recording machines, photographic devices sensitive to heat and light beyond human perception. Locals watched them setting up near the hypocenter. They worked through the night, whispering in English, marking invisible points on the ground with chalk. The next morning, the equipment was gone, and every trace of their presence erased. When questioned, the American command dismissed the report. No such research team was deployed, but a year later, a classified memo, declassified decades later, described something curious. Anomalous luminous readings detected at ground zero, continuing intermittently for 17 months after detonation. Luminous readings, lights that shouldn't have existed. Was it radiation? Maybe, but radiation doesn't hum like a song. It doesn't drift in shapes resembling human outlines. A young photographer, Kenji Aoki, caught something strange on film in the ruins, a faint blur beside a shattered wall. He thought it was light leakage. But when he developed the negatives, He noticed the blur resembled the shadow of a man kneeling, though there was no man when he took the picture. He brought it to an American researcher, who stared at it for a long time before quietly saying, "Don't show this to anyone, ever." By 1947, the surviving residents of Hiroshima began to understand that their stories were unwelcome. Not just unbelievable, but dangerous. Radio Tokyo received dozens of letters describing the whispers, as locals called them. None were ever broadcast. A short film by a Japanese journalist showing mysterious night glows was confiscated before it could air. And then came the silencing. The American occupation authorities, led by General Douglas MacArthur, introduced strict press censorship. Any story, photograph, or mention of the atomic aftermath required approval. Reports that contained psychological disturbances or supernatural content were automatically rejected. Survivors' testimonies about visions, voices, or inexplicable lights were labeled propaganda. The official narrative was clear. Hiroshima was a scientific event, not a spiritual one, but inside the city something continued to stir. At night, people said they could feel sudden waves of heat move through the air, followed by a sound like distant murmuring. Some claimed to see silhouettes near the Aioi Bridge, where the bomb had detonated above. Others reported dreams so vivid they woke screaming, certain they had seen the moment of impact again, from someone else's eyes. A priest, Father Tsubaki, recorded in his diary that he had been visited by a group of children, all describing the same dream, standing on a burning river, calling for help, unable to move. He wrote, "These are not nightmares. They are transmissions." Then something changed. In May 1947, several survivors who had reported these experiences suddenly left Hiroshima. Some moved inland, some vanished entirely. Those who remained became quieter. Interviews grew cautious, half-spoken, full of pauses, as if they feared someone was listening. One of them, a nurse named Michiko, later confided to a visiting anthropologist that she had been approached by an American officer who warned her not to speak of the night voices. She remembered his tone more than his words, cold, practiced, final. She never spoke of it again. But years later, in the 1970s, a box was discovered in an abandoned building near the old hospital grounds. Inside were damaged reel tapes labeled in English, Project Silence, Section B. The audio was barely audible, but when amplified, one could make out faint whispers. Human voices speaking Japanese, overlapping, distorted, as if recorded through layers of static. Some called it interference. Others said it sounded like the city itself trying to remember. What exactly was Project Silence? Why would American teams record, erase, and classify the stories of survivors? Theories emerged, some scientific, some chillingly strange. One researcher suggested the bomb's flash had imprinted the consciousness of its victims into the city's atmosphere, a kind of psychic radiation. Another argued that what survivors described wasn't haunting, but a phenomenon of time itself, fragments replaying endlessly where energy had once peaked beyond comprehension. Whatever the truth, it terrified those in power. If something remained in Hiroshima that science couldn't explain, then the world's first atomic victory wasn't just a weapon, it was a doorway. And maybe that's why silence was enforced, not to hide guilt, but to contain something much bigger. Something humanity wasn't ready to face. The last surviving witness to speak openly about the whispers did so in 1952. Her name was Aya Nakamura. She had been a child during the bombing. When asked if she still heard them, she smiled faintly and said, "Only when they remember me." Her words were recorded. A week later, that interview disappeared from the archives, but her phrase lingers, like an echo trapped in scorched air. And somewhere, beneath the concrete layers of modern Hiroshima, maybe the shadows still whisper, waiting for someone to listen again. The truth doesn't stay buried forever. It hums beneath silence, growing louder each year. And as we step into Chapter 2, that hum is about to be heard for the first time since 1945. The vanished recordings, the tapes were real. At least that's what the archivist believed when he first found them. It was 1978, more than 3 decades after the bombing. Hiroshima had been rebuilt. Clean streets, concrete buildings, neon lights masking old scars. But beneath that surface still lay the ruins of what once was, sealed beneath layers of new life. When archivist Hiroshi Takada received permission to catalog a batch of forgotten U.S. occupation materials discovered in a military warehouse, he expected only reports, forms, maybe a few faded photographs. What he uncovered instead was the box. Inside, 5 rusted reels, a notebook, and a sealed envelope marked Project Silence, Confidential, Restricted Access. The handwriting was English, but faintly trembling, as though written by someone in haste. Hiroshi hesitated before unsealing it. He knew that officially no such project had ever existed. That meant, by touching it, he was already trespassing on something America wanted the world to forget. He took one of the reels home that night, slipping it under his jacket. He waited until his wife and children were asleep, then threaded it into his old tape player. The static was thick, the sound uneven, but through it he heard something. A man's voice, distant, speaking in clipped English. Subject 42. Continued manifestations detected. Voices recorded for 17 minutes before cessation. Then another sound. Whispering. Layered, overlapping, like many people speaking at once, but too faint to understand. Hiroshi leaned closer, adjusting the volume. The whispers grew sharper. He could almost make out Japanese words, names maybe, or please. Then suddenly, a scream. Short, piercing, echoing across the static. The tape snapped. He sat frozen for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the machine. The next morning, when he returned to the archive, the other reels were gone. The notebook, too. Only the empty box remained. That was the moment he realized someone else had been watching. Days later, 2 men visited his office. They were polite in foreign suits, carrying identification he couldn't read. They asked simple questions. What did he find? Did he listen to it? Did he tell anyone? He lied, said he hadn't touched anything. The taller man smiled faintly, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said, "That's good. Keep it that way." Then they left, leaving the faint scent of tobacco behind. But curiosity doesn't vanish with a warning. Over the next months, Hiroshi began to search quietly. He found old colleagues who remembered whispers of psychological recording experiments conducted in the ruins during 1946-47. None had ever been made public. One nurse, now elderly, said she'd seen microphones placed inside shattered buildings at night, hidden in the rubble. The Americans called them spirit tests. The Japanese called them listening to the dead. One of those microphones, she said, had melted the next morning, without any fire. Hiroshi wrote all of this down in secret. He began to believe that the Americans hadn't come to Hiroshima just to study radiation. They had come to study something else, something they couldn't explain. And then, one evening, while visiting the Peace Memorial Museum, he met a woman standing before the preserved wall shadow, the silhouette of a man burned permanently into the concrete. She introduced herself softly. "My name is Aya Nakamura." The same Aya from the missing 1952 interview. She was in her 80s now, small and calm, her eyes sharp with memory. Hiroshi asked if she still remembered that day. She nodded. "They told us we were lucky to survive," she said, "but they didn't understand what surviving meant." They sat on a bench overlooking the river as the city lights shimmered across the water. Aya spoke slowly, as if every word carried weight. "We thought the voices were grief, but they were too clear. They said names none of us knew, places that didn't exist anymore. And sometimes they asked questions." "What kind of questions?" Hiroshi asked. She turned to him, her face pale in the light. "They wanted to know what year it was." That night, Hiroshi couldn't sleep. The idea lingered, voices of the dead asking about time. Not haunting. Not madness. Something else entirely. He revisited the tape the next day. When he rewound it carefully and played it again, something new appeared in the static. A soft pulse, rhythmic like a coded signal. He compared it to Morse code, to electrical interference, to heartbeat patterns. It didn't match anything. Yet somehow it seemed intentional. He took the broken reel to a sound engineer at a small studio in Tokyo. After cleaning and digitizing the fragments, the engineer froze mid-process and whispered, "There's a second layer." When they isolated the frequencies, the background static formed faint harmonic tones, voices overlapping English and Japanese, repeating one phrase, "We are still here." The engineer deleted his copy and refused to touch it again. 2 nights later, Hiroshi's apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen except the tape, but whoever took it left something on his table, a photograph. It showed American soldiers standing beside strange equipment in the ruins. Behind them, faintly visible, were blurred human figures, semi-transparent, like reflections caught on glass. Written at the bottom in fading ink, Contact Field Zone B. After that, Hiroshi went silent. His colleagues said he left the city suddenly, leaving behind his work and his family. Others said he was taken. No one knows. His name disappeared from public records by the early 1980s, yet fragments of his notes survived, copied secretly by a student he mentored. Those notes described something called temporal echo phenomena, a theory that the atomic blast didn't only destroy matter, but fractured moments of time itself, trapping impressions, memories, even consciousness within the burned air. A permanent recording, replaying whenever conditions aligned, it would explain why survivors kept hearing voices decades later. Not ghosts, not hallucinations, the city remembering itself. But why would the United States hide that? Perhaps because acknowledging it meant admitting that Hiroshima wasn't just a military victory. It was an experiment that opened a window into something beyond human control. In 1985, a strange report surfaced briefly in an American scientific journal before being withdrawn. It mentioned residual auditory anomalies detected during seismic studies in Hiroshima's bedrock, low-frequency sounds, rhythmic, human in cadence. The lead researcher, Dr. Robert Lang, died the following year in what was described as an accident. His field notes vanished. And then, silence returned. For almost 40 years, no one dared mention Project Silence again. Until 2021, when an anonymous file was uploaded online under the title, The City That Speaks. Inside were snippets of digitized reel recordings, hissing static, faint voices, and in one clip, a soft female whisper, "We remember you." Experts called it a hoax. The original uploader deleted their account. But one trace remained. GPS tag embedded in the metadata. It pointed to the riverbank near the original hypocenter, the same place Aya Nakamura used to sit every night before she died. And if you stand there today, some say when the wind is low and the city hum quiets, you can still hear it. The faint echo beneath the sound of water, a whisper that seems to call from another time, something that survived, something that refuses to be silenced. But who recorded those voices? And if they weren't spirits, what were they? The answer lies not in Hiroshima's ruins, but in the secret American files that vanished after 1947, files that mention another experiment, this time in Nagasaki. That's where we go next. Chapter 3 awaits. The second experiment for decades, Hiroshima had carried the burden of silence alone. But somewhere, buried deep in the records of post-war America, another name kept appearing beside it, Nagasaki. Always written in the same coded format, always linked to one phrase, echo replication unsuccessful. It began with a discovery made by a young American historian named Claire Edwards. She was working in the archives of the U.S. Defense Department, cataloging unclassified documents from the 1940s. Most were dull, supply orders, medical logs, routine memos. Until she found a small unlabeled envelope tucked between folders. Inside were 3 photographs, each of the ruins of Nagasaki, but from odd angles. The focus wasn't on destruction, but on light, a faint shimmer in the air above ground zero, visible even in daylight, forming what looked like silhouettes. At the back of the photos, a single note was written. Attempt 2, field echoes inconsistent. Contact duration 3.2 minutes. Claire didn't understand it then. But she felt something in those images, an unease that pulled at her. She took discrete photos with her phone, planning to study them later. That night, while reviewing them in her apartment, she noticed something impossible. On one photo, the silhouettes were no longer faint. They had grown darker, sharper, as though the image itself had evolved. She blinked. Checked again. The original scan from earlier that day showed only the ruins. The new image clearly showed figures, dozens of them, standing in rows, facing the camera. By morning, her computer crashed. The files were gone. When she returned to the archives, the envelope had vanished. The clerk told her there was no record of any such folder ever existing, and when she pressed further, he whispered, "Don't ask about that project. People did once. They're not here anymore." Claire couldn't let it go. Over the next months, she dug through forgotten archives and cross-referenced military orders. She discovered that in October 1946, barely a year after the bombings, an American scientific team had secretly visited Nagasaki. Their purpose wasn't to measure radiation. They were testing something they called echo retrieval, a coded name for experiments designed to capture the residual imprints left behind. After the atomic detonation, the same mysterious voices reported in Hiroshima, the idea was terrifyingly simple. If Hiroshima's temporal echoes were real, then the energy field of Nagasaki might still contain the same phenomena. The Americans wanted to prove it could be recorded, replicated, perhaps even weaponized. They built underground bunkers fitted with magnetic coils and experimental sound devices. They called these resonance chambers. Inside them, they placed recorders capable of picking up frequencies far below human hearing. Witnesses described seeing glowing mist forming inside those rooms, pulsing like breath, and then the equipment failed. According to one survivor, an interpreter who later escaped the project, the air inside the bunker suddenly grew heavy. The walls vibrated, and for exactly 3 minutes, every man in that room heard the same thing. The screams of Nagasaki's dead, echoing as if the moment of detonation were happening again. When the sound stopped, one scientist collapsed. His pulse flatlined. The rest refused to speak about what they heard. The interpreter claimed he saw something else too. A shadow burned into the wall that hadn't been there before, shaped like a man reaching out. That incident was officially erased. The bunker was sealed, the project terminated. But internal memos hinted otherwise. One document bore a chilling sentence. Replication incomplete. Phenomenon relocated to Pacific Facility for Containment. A facility, somewhere across the ocean. Claire followed that clue, tracing supply orders and transport logs. All pointed toward a classified base on an island near Guam, codenamed Orpheus Station. On paper, it was a weather research post. In reality, it was where fragments of Hiroshima's and Nagasaki's recorded data had been taken, including, it seemed, the original Project Silence reels. She booked a flight to Guam under the guise of a historian researching post-war reconstruction. Locals knew little about Orpheus Station, only that strange light sometimes appeared over the water, and that the U.S. military still guarded the island, though no one officially lived there. Claire hired a fisherman to take her close one evening. From a distance, the island looked quiet, but as night fell, she saw it. Pulses of pale blue light flickering from inside the trees, almost rhythmic, like breath. The fisherman grew nervous. "We don't go near there," he said. "You hear voices. The sea remembers." The next morning, Claire found herself being followed. 2 men in dark clothing watched her from the hotel lobby. One slipped a note under her door. "Stop looking." They listened. She should have left. But something inside her, curiosity, obsession, maybe guilt, kept her digging. She reached out to a retired American communications officer who had once served at Orpheus. At first, he refused to speak. Then, after a long silence, he said quietly, "You think the bomb ended something?" "No, miss, it started something." They recorded time itself. And once you record time, it starts to notice you back. He told her that after the Nagasaki experiment failed, the scientists believed the human mind might act as a better receiver than machines. They began experimenting with sensory isolation, subjects placed in darkness, listening to field resonance sounds taken from Hiroshima's ruins. Some began to scream that they saw people walking toward them, others spoke in voices not their own. Every subject eventually went mad. One man, before he died, scrawled on the wall of his isolation chamber, "They are not echoes. They are waiting," Claire recorded the officer's testimony. A week later, he was found dead in his home, apparent suicide. Her emails started disappearing. Her phone recorded strange interference, faint whispers overlaying her own voice. When she replayed one, a whisper said, "We remember you." It was the same phrase found on the 2021 digital file. That's when she realized the connection, the same voices that haunted Hiroshima, had somehow followed the data wherever it went. Every copy, every recording, every attempt to contain it had only spread it further. Project Silence wasn't suppression anymore. It was containment. And if the containment had failed, what would happen to the world that had forgotten? She planned to publish her findings anonymously, but before she could, her apartment was broken into. Her hard drives gone, her notes soaked in water, as if someone tried to erase the ink itself. Only one photograph survived, the Nagasaki ruins, and within them, faint silhouettes reaching upward. In the bottom corner, someone had scribbled a new word. Not echo, not silence, just one name. Resonance. Claire disappeared 2 weeks later. No one ever found her body. But a year after that, a journalist in Japan received a package with no return address. Inside was a single USB drive. The files contained grainy footage, waves crashing, faint voices overlapping, and a timestamp. Orpheus Station, 1947. In the final frame, the camera panned across a bunker wall. On it, written in both English and Japanese, were the words, "We are not gone. We are recording you now." The footage ended there, and once again, silence followed. Official silence, institutional silence. But silence never lasts. Because somewhere beneath the noise of the modern world, those whispers continue. Traveling, adapting, remembering. What if the bomb didn't just destroy life, but gave it another form? That question brings us to the present. Because in 2023, seismic sensors near Hiroshima recorded something impossible. Low-frequency sound patterns, matching the exact cadence of human speech. They lasted 3 minutes. Exactly the same duration as the Nagasaki experiment, and what they said, no one is supposed to know. But in Chapter 4, we will. The voices beneath the earth. The sound came at 2:17 a.m. At first, the sensors registered it as a mild tremor, just the earth shifting, nothing unusual for a country built on fault lines. But then the pattern began repeating. Too rhythmic, too deliberate. Scientists at the Hiroshima Seismic Research Center leaned closer to their monitors as the waveform appeared again. 3 pulses. A pause, then 3 more. Dr. Reiko Matsuda, a quiet woman known for her precision, was the first to notice the anomaly. "That's not seismic," she whispered. "That's structured." The data ran for 3 minutes and 14 seconds. When they converted the frequencies into audible range, the room went silent. What they heard wasn't random noise, it was something resembling speech. Not clear enough to understand, but undeniably human. The youngest technician looked pale. "It's like they're under the ground." The recording was archived, flagged for review. Within hours, a call came from Tokyo. A government official requested the data be sent immediately. The center's servers went offline soon after. When the team returned the next morning, the files were gone. Only Reiko's personal backup survived, hidden, encrypted, untouched. She didn't tell anyone. Instead, she copied the data to a flash drive and left the city that night, heading for the coast. She needed quiet, isolation, somewhere the noise of the world wouldn't interfere. She rented a small cabin near the Seto Inland Sea, connected her laptop, and played the sound again. At first, only static, then a pulse. Slow, measured, and then a word. It wasn't English or Japanese. But the syllables rolled like echoes of both, a pattern repeating. She ran it through translation software, frequency analysis, even AI modeling. The results froze her. The machine translated the phrase as, "still here." Her breath caught. The same phrase whispered in the 2021 file. The same one reported by survivors decades earlier. Coincidence? No. This was a reply. Over the next days, Reiko began noticing strange effects. Her computer speakers would hiss softly even when disconnected. Late at night, faint tapping noises echoed from beneath the wooden floorboards, like distant footsteps moving in rhythm with the recorded pulses. She told herself it was imagination, fatigue. But then the lights began to flicker, each flash syncing with the playback pattern of the sound. The world outside seemed to respond to it. On the 5th night, as a storm rolled over the coast, she opened her window to the rain and played the full recording aloud. The wind died instantly. The air thickened, pressing against her skin. For a heartbeat, everything fell silent until she heard something impossible. A whisper. Not from her speakers. From the water outside, it called her name. She slammed the window shut, heart pounding. The laptop flickered, and a single line of text appeared across the screen, letters forming on their own. "We remember what they erased." The screen went black. Reiko backed away, trembling. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was intelligence, memory. She took the flash drive and left before dawn, heading to Tokyo to meet a man she trusted, Professor David Klein, an American physicist who had spent years studying low-frequency anomalies in post-nuclear zones. When she told him what she'd found, he didn't laugh. He simply said, "It's starting again." David showed her a file labeled Orpheus Declassification 53. It described a final experiment conducted in the Pacific, a test to synchronize human cognition with temporal residue fields. In simpler words, they tried to make a human mind hear what the bomb had left behind. The test ended abruptly. The subjects experienced seizures, identical hallucinations, and one message repeated across all logs: "We see you." Project Silence wasn't meant to suppress, David said. It was containment. They knew whatever the bomb created wasn't fading, it was expanding. Following the recordings, the memory traces, even people who listened. Reiko asked if he believed the voices were real. David hesitated. "Real doesn't mean alive," he said. "It means measurable, persistent, and what Hiroshima created, it's both." They decided to verify it. Together, they played her recording through specialized sound equipment designed to visualize frequencies. The result made David step back. On the screen, the waveform twisted into shapes, loops, spirals, intersecting patterns that looked disturbingly like a human face forming in sound. Reiko whispered, "It's responding." The pattern pulsed once, twice. Then the equipment shut itself down. The power flickered across the entire building. Somewhere in the distance, alarms sounded. An email arrived seconds later on David's terminal, unsigned, containing only one line. "Cease playback. You are opening the channel." Within an hour, government officials arrived, not Japanese-American. They took the equipment, the data, even the power cells. David and Reiko were ordered to end their research for national safety reasons. But the sound couldn't be contained anymore. That night, Reiko's phone rang, though no number appeared. She answered. Static filled the line, followed by a soft whisper. "Not containment, communion." Then the call ended. She turned to David, panic in her voice. "It's spreading," he nodded slowly. "The resonance doesn't die. It remembers, and now it's learning how to speak again." They left Tokyo before sunrise, heading to Hiroshima. If the voices were truly awakening, that city, ground zero of everything, would be the first to feel it. As they walked through the Peace Memorial Park, Reiko noticed something unusual. Visitors stood near the memorial wall, silent, listening to something. Not music. Not noise, just listening. When she asked an elderly man what he heard, he smiled faintly. "It's the same hum every August," he said. "Like the city breathing." That night, near the river, the hum grew louder. The water rippled without wind. The ground vibrated beneath their feet, slow and steady, almost like a heartbeat. Then faintly, words began to form in the air, not heard but felt. They weren't pleas or cries. They were questions. "Do you still remember? Will you hear us this time?" Reiko felt tears blur her vision. David reached for the recorder, but it refused to power on. Then, for a fleeting moment, the entire sky above Hiroshima shimmered, like heat rising from pavement. And in that wavering air, they saw them. Dozens of faint figures standing across the riverbank, motionless, glowing with pale light. Not angry. Not vengeful. Just waiting. Then, as quickly as it began, it ended. The figures vanished. The air stilled. The hum faded back into silence. Reiko turned to David, her voice trembling. "What do we do now?" He looked at her with a haunted expression. "We don't do anything. They've already found us." The next day, Reiko disappeared. David filed a report claiming she had returned home, but her apartment remained untouched. The only thing found on her desk was her recorder. When officials played it, the file began with the same hum as before, steady, patient, alive. Then came a voice. Hers, soft, calm. They're not trapped anymore. And in the final seconds, another voice overlapped hers, dozens layered together, human yet not. Speaking in perfect unison, "We remember what you buried. We are beneath your feet." And we are still speaking. The recording ended in static. That was the last known transmission linked to Project Silence. But something strange happened after that. In the months that followed, geologists detected faint low-frequency vibrations beneath multiple atomic test sites. Nevada, Bikini Atoll, Semipalatinsk, all following the same rhythm, all lasting 3 minutes. It seemed the voices had traveled, or maybe they had never stopped. And now, as the hum spreads quietly across the planet, one question remains. If the dead remember us, what happens when they decide to answer? That answer begins where it all started, beneath the ruins of Hiroshima. The silent break midnight in Hiroshima is a curiously still hour. The city's rebuild hums quietly beneath neon, but the ground still holds something ancient. As Hiroshima's historic center sleeps, two figures stand by the river that flows past the old blast zone. Dr. Reiko Matsuda and Professor David Klein have returned to where it all began, a place where the bomb burst, and something far stranger took root. The river glimmers under the moonlight, reflection shifting like molten glass. Reiko breathes in the scent of burned earth and water, the air thick with memory. David hands her a small device, a recorder modified to capture frequencies beyond human hearing. If they're here, he says, this will find them. Reiko nods, though her hands shake. She presses record. The faint hum rises, barely audible at first. Then it grows, a deep pulse beneath their feet. She shivers. There, she whispers. The recorder vibrates on the ground. The water's surface ripples, though the night is still. They step back. The hum becomes a voice, not words they understand, yet. The amplitude rises, and suddenly the lights of the city blink as if answering. Horns honk in the distance. The ground trembles gently like a sigh. Did you hear that? She asks. David nods, face pale. The voice grows louder, clear rhythm, direct address. Then it stops. Silence returns. They wait. Nothing. Then a single syllable spoken in a perfect human tone. Here. The device captures it. They stare at each other. It's here. Suddenly the river surges without wind. Water splashes onto the embankment. The recorder's lights spin and go dark. The hum is gone. Only heartbeat and panting. Reiko scrambles for a second battery pack. David holds a flashlight steady. They exchange a look. It's happening. Half a mile away, a faint glow rises above the former hypocenter. Pale blue-green light like aurora in miniature flickers for seconds, then vanishes. The sensation travels up Reiko's spine, the city itself responding. David moves toward the light. Reiko hesitates. He wait, but the pull is stronger. He walks, the glow returns. And within it, shapes, silhouettes of men and women hovering in the air. They don't move their mouths, but the air around them pulses. Reiko steps closer, heart pounding. The figures fade. The glow dims. Silence again. They both know what this means. The experiment never ended. It just changed. The voices didn't vanish. They migrated. They adapted. And now they're manifesting. Reiko glances at the recorder, which still blinks with red light. She exhales. We captured it. David nods. But capturing may have triggered it. The riverbank lights flicker again. Car alarms in the distance wail. Something unseen brushes past Reiko. She feels a cold touch on her shoulder. She spins, but no one is behind her. Only the device, still recording. She reaches down and presses stop. The quiet becomes heavy. David holds the recorder out. Play it, he says. They listen. And this time the whisper is clear. We never left. It repeats twice. Then, your time is next. Reiko gasps. The device shuts off. They look at each other. This is no longer an investigation. It's an invitation, or a warning. As they leave, a police siren approaches. Lights in the city flash. Somehow the entire night seems to react. Back in the city, Reiko's phone vibrates. A text, help us, no sender. They freeze. Their discovery has already spread. At the hotel, Reiko opens her recorder files. The folder is corrupted. All data except one clip is unreadable. The clip shows the riverbank, the glow, the silhouettes, but then it cuts to static. And a timestamp, 3 minutes and 14 seconds. The exact duration of earlier experiments. David slams his fist on the table. It's synchronized. Reiko nearly backs away. It's resonating with something global. She looks at her reflection in the window. In the dark glass, behind her own image, she thinks she sees a face, pale, distant, luminous. She blinks and it's gone. She exhales. They saw me. The next morning, they board a train south. The station announcements crackle, indistinct. On the platform, she glimpses a man watching them. No uniform. No badge. He turns and leaves before she can approach. A small earpiece glints. They share a look. Someone knows. Someone is watching. As the train pulls away, David slides a folder across the table. The cover reads, Worldwide Incident Reports, Radiant Hum, 2023-24. Charts show low-frequency spikes at test sites, old bomb zones, nuclear waste storage facilities. Reiko's voice tight. It's global? He nods. Everywhere a blast like Hiroshima happened, something revived. They look at each other, the magnitude dawning. The earth is humming with memory, and now they are part of it. In the quiet of the carriage, the recorder beeps softly. They freeze. The light is on again. On the last file, we hear you. The screen goes black. Outside, the rails clack under the train. The world hums beneath them. And somewhere below the tracks, something responds.